Here to discuss tech's tough choices, please welcome Nicole Wong, the former Deputy Chief Technology Officer during the Obama administration. Elliot Schrage, the outgoing Vice President of Communications and Public Policy at Facebook. And here to lead the conversation, please welcome the Atlantic's Conor Friedersdorf.
All right, guys, we have about 20 minutes to solve all of the hardest problems in tech.
Awesome.
Let's start with Google in China.
There we go.
You were at Google when they went into China, when they pulled out of China. You said previously that you thought that both of those decisions were the correct ones at the time. Now we see Google employees who are raising concerns about Google's new initiative, Project Dragonfly, I think. The details are a little bit murky, but do you think that Google should go back into China, and how should it make the decision? Are there red lines where they would say, if this in China, we shall not do it?
Yeah, so I've been out of Google since 2011, so I'll start with that. I was at the company when we decided to go in, and it was a hard decision to go in. It took almost 2 years of discussion among the executives. And it was a hard decision, actually, when we decided to leave in 2010 as well. So I can speak to the kinds of things that we considered when we decided to go in and when we decided to leave. Going in, the question was, is there something that we can do in this market, which is obviously very constrained, that will improve access to information, that will encourage people to look for new ideas and information? And so going into China, we only brought the search engine in. We did not offer authenticated services tied to actual individuals like Gmail and Google Groups and those sort of things. It was only the search engine. It was decided that we would have to censor in order to be in the country. But when we did so, we did something that none of the other search engines at the time were doing, which is to have a disclaimer at the bottom of the page whenever we removed content that could not be shown because of government regulation. And by doing so, creating that sense of dissonance for the user who says, oh, I'm not seeing the whole world, I'm only seeing a portion. So I think the principles about going in were about optimizing for access to information, being transparent when we couldn't do so, and being protective of the users. I don't know what Google's currently considering in terms of the products it wants to offer and the adjustments it would need to make to its existing service in order to do that, but I hope they're having that conversation, right? Which is, what are the North Stars of the company? What are the things that allow it to be trusted across the internet that they cannot cross? And that's a really important conversation at every level of the company. And I was extraordinarily happy to see the employees say that.
Elliot, perhaps the biggest Facebook news recently has been the company coming under fire for hiring a firm that was criticizing George Soros after George Soros criticized Facebook. And I was thinking about whether or how this bears on the question of free speech. And I think as a journalist watching that, one of the things that I thought was, well, there was this prominent critic of Facebook. Is Facebook ever going to go after me or another journalist if we are critical of it? It has an awful lot of information about all of us. It has an awful lot of power. My question is, if Facebook is committed to free speech, should that include an obligation to refrain from chilling the speech of people who are critical of the company? And in your time at Facebook, were there any other people that it targeted in this fashion because of criticism of the company?
So I'm not going to go into more detail of the information that's already been out. I actually really strongly disagree with your characterization that of all of the news about Facebook, that's the most pressing one. But I will say this, and I was really struck by the last panel. I believe that the best way you get accuracy and understanding in civil and tolerant debate is by having an honest and transparent exchange of ideas. And I think part of that honest and transparent exchange of ideas is understanding people's motivations and understanding who's doing what and why, and at least explaining that. So I absolutely am not here to defend all of the things that every consultant has done for Facebook, and I posted and wrote something pretty lengthy about it, and I encourage people to read it. But I think the principle that somebody who is a critic of yours, who is an investor, who is making statements criticizing you in a public debate on a public issue, if they're entering that public fray and they're making statements, I don't think it is all illegitimate. Indeed, I think it is legitimate to honestly, accurately, transparently communicate about that. And I think you do that when you write articles. I think Atlantic does that when it communicates about both sides of an issue, and I think that's a completely legitimate thing to do.
Moving on to another pressing Facebook matter, Mark Zuckerberg published a memo talking about content moderation. Part of what he talked about was essentially when someone gets kicked off the platform for some sort of speech, or perhaps a kind of post that they make gets taken down again and again, and there might be some kind of appeal to a neutral decision maker. On the other hand, he talked about what he called borderline content, content that isn't against the rules technically, but it goes right up to the line. So it's not quite hate speech, say, but it's offensive, or it's not quite nudity, but it is very provocative. And he talked about punishing that sort of speech on the platform by showing it to people less. My question is, when does showing it to people less cross the line into a kind of censorship that is no different from removing it entirely?
Right. So I think, and this is actually, look, I'm glad you asked the question. This is why I was so delighted to come here. And again, Nicole and I worked on a bunch of these issues. Nicole and I have in common that we were both very closely involved and both testified when we were at Google on China issues. And it is interesting that what goes around comes around. The very concerns that people had about China are now being applied in other contexts, in some cases to governments like Germany, with respect to content, in some cases to platforms like Facebook. Mark, and so I should be clear, I think one of the most extraordinary and powerful challenges we face as a society going forward, we were talking about this backstage, is how do we manage the distribution of information and content on these new platforms? Let's be clear that the technologies that Facebook and Google and others give people extraordinary powers. You all have, if you have a phone, the power of a broadcasting network, the power of a news organization, both to distribute and to receive content from any place in the world that has internet access. And the question is, who gets to decide, and who gets to decide what to distribute and what are the constraints? And so yes, I think we as a platform and all of the platforms are trying to struggle not only with where you say you cannot do this, and where you say this may be appropriate, but we are going to limit your expression. Limitations on expression may be the refusal to distribute, but limitations on expression may also be we're not going to distribute it as much. And the question is, what are the policies, what are the practices, and who gets to make the decisions? And I think Mark's letter, and it is long, and I'm sorry that these issues are long, I encourage you to read it, begins that.
Implicit in the letter is the idea that Facebook makes a decision to go into a new country, to offer its service in a new place, often a place that at least the leadership of Facebook doesn't have particular familiarity with or understand. Is there such a thing as growing too fast, of being too big to succeed in a sense, where growth concerns are pushing the company to go into places where it hasn't figured out content moderation yet, and maybe it would be better to go slower?
I think we've not been implicit. I think Mark has said implicitly, not implicitly, explicitly, that we have, in the growth of Facebook, in the evolution of the service, the company focused more on offering the benefits and focusing on delivering the benefits of access to information, connection to friends and family and others, than focusing on the risks. And that was a mistake. The only thing I would say, I did not have a chance to hear the whole last panel, but to suggest that Facebook or Google have not made extraordinary investments since the the mistakes have been acknowledged is just wrong. We have 30,000 people now who are involved in some way in content restrictions, in content moderations, restricting hate speech and preventing bad content from distributing. We've made extraordinary investments in machine learning and artificial intelligence tools to prevent content from being distributed even before it would get reported by people. But so sure, I think we were all slow, and Facebook in particular has been slow in, was slow in identifying it and has moved very, very quickly in responding.
I also think, just to I think we don't want to talk narrowly, right, about do we have the right content policies and do we have enough people? 30,000 people is a lot of people. Do we have enough people to catch all of it? What I read out of that post from Mark was that you're reviewing 2 million pieces of content a day.
By humans.
Right,
I think there's lots more, exactly.
But if you scale, if you grow, those numbers only ratchet up. And so the question is, does that solve the problem? I'm not sure you ever end up solving the problem of having bad content on your system. So some of the answers, I think, are technical, which is how do you distribute less bad content and let better content rise, and who makes the decision about good versus bad? That's critically.
You've been concerned about the other side of this equation of limiting content that is good, that you want out there. 10 years ago, most of the pressure on tech was coming from authoritarian countries to kick stuff off the platform. Today, it's coming from the United States, from Germany, from Americans and Germans who are saying, stop hate speech or stop Holocaust denial, things that we, of course, have sympathy with, but
I think that's right. I like that, which is why when we started the conversation at China, right? What an interesting time. That was 10 years ago. And at the time, I was looking back 10 years ago, the thing we were so concerned about was Google and its properties, YouTube, Blogger, Orchid. Nobody remembers Orchid, the social network, right? But it had a social network. So, but all of those properties, we had been blocked in 25 different countries. We thought the worst thing, the biggest threat to our mission and existence was being blocked, that countries would not let us show all the information that or make available all the information that we had. And what we've discovered after 10 years is actually our openness has been weaponized, right? That disinformation and misinformation is now being used to sort of poison those.
I think I say two things. One is I agree completely with Nicole in the sense these are not problems that you solve. These are problems that you manage. And the question is, do you manage the problem to make the situation worse, or do you manage the problem to make things better? And I'm deeply worried that in many ways, the debates that we have in this country and in many Western liberal democracies are driven more by anecdote than by research, are driven more by rhetoric than by reality. And I think we have real responsibilities as platforms. That's an easy statement for me to make. It's a nice soundbite, but that's on us. I think, and this is when Mark talks about proper regulation, the responsibility is on the platforms to do a better job identifying what is realistic and what is honest, both as a problem and as a solution. I think we're in a world now where people are making claims about the dangers and the risks and ignoring the benefits and the opportunities.
Nicole, you could see how someone in Germany might say, the dangers of Holocaust denial are clear. What would be wrong with having a law in this country about that forces tech companies to respond quickly and take content like that down? Is there a downside? What's the downside?
I think the downside is what you were talking about in the Facebook post, right? Which is where you draw the line, you have a chilling effect on one side of it that chills certain speech. So some speech will not be available. That should be legal, that will come up right up to the line because the line is drawn and because people make errors on both sides.
Is there a technical downside where you build a certain tool in to moderate content in one country that makes you more prone to censorship in others?
Yes.
If you build a tool, and this is the thing I have with the current policy discussion, I think every country is looking at its own vulnerabilities. So it could be Germany, it could be Thailand, it could be Saudi Arabia, and they want a tool that solves for their problem, and they don't realize that on a global platform, when you build the tool, every country gets it, because you don't have a reason to not allow it to go to every country. So if I build a tool to protect democracy from terrorist content, from hate speech, I've built that tool for the Chinese authorities, for the Turkish authorities, for the Saudi Arabian authorities, as much as I've built it for every Western democracy that you think needs to have it. And that, I think, from a policy standpoint, is a really difficult one to overcome. I do think in the self-reflection that tech companies are doing right now, it needs to not just be, am I making the right content decisions? Are my people trained right to identify the proper hate speech? Those are hard. Those will always be hard, and we will always make mistakes. Like, let's just put, we will always make mistakes. But shouldn't we be reflecting a little bit more on, are we building the right tools? Are we building the right platforms? Do these platforms play to our worst instincts about information, as opposed to help us to choose the better pieces of information?
I want to get to audience questions.
And who decides what the better pieces of information are?
There's going to be a microphone coming around, and I'm just trying to spot it. We've got it right over here.
Hi, it's Dave here from BBC News. Elliot, can I just ask, did you at any point speak with Mark Zuckerberg before the New York Times piece about opposition research and the work of definers? And separately, now that you're heading out of Facebook, do you have a view that you'd like to share about Zuckerberg's continuing as both chairman and chief executive of Facebook?
So I think it is a popular topic for public debate. My feeling is that Mark has been an extraordinary leader and has done an extraordinary job across 2 or 3 dimensions. One of the dimensions is he's identified how to apply technologies to provide extraordinary opportunities for people to connect with each other and share information in ways they've never been able to do before. And that is unprecedented. They did this as a college kid. I think it is also true, and he's recognized, that while he has been an extraordinary product visionary, he's also been more idealistic than the real world permits. And I think he is, so the second thing I would say is he is a pretty darn fast learner. And so when he identifies a project or a problem and he wants to address it, and he thinks it's important to address, he knows how to rally people to respond quickly. And then the third thing is really related to that. This is a guy who knows how to delegate. And so when there are projects or problems or issues that he wants resolved, he suggests direction, and the people who he has hired are responsible for implementing his direction.
Does that mean that you did or didn't brief him on
I'm actually sort of struck by the last conversation. I feel like I was pretty unambiguous in the op-ed, not the op-ed, in the blog post that I wrote to suggest that my teams were responsible for what happened, and I accept responsibility for that. And I don't really think you can all disagree. I don't think that's either relevant to a conversation in the future, speech on the platform, or relevant to the management, because that is how the organization
Let's get to another question before we're done.
Hi, my name's Danny. I'm from the Castellet School. I was wondering, with regard to Facebook's contributions to perpetuating hateful and violent actions towards the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, how do you believe Facebook should be held accountable for their contributions to these issues?
I think Facebook has been a force for positive things and horrible things in Myanmar. And we have been working for a while, indeed more slowly than we should have been, in helping ensure that the information on our platform was not contributing or exacerbating the violence. It's an ongoing issue. I think we are doing more now. And I think it's a legitimate question to try to understand the extent to which we exacerbated an already terrible situation. And it is something that we have been clear that did not respond or respect the values that we hope, was, to refer back earlier to what I said, was more a reflection of our optimism in how tools like ours could be used beneficially and not effective for the status quo in the country. And we're sorry about that.
From a structural perspective, when a company like this has an impact in a country like Myanmar, should it be a matter of international law in some sense? Should it be subject to the countries themselves? Have you thought about this question of?
So I should be clear. I think these are all legitimate questions. I think we were guided in our response to the situation in Myanmar by the international community. The international community includes the United Nations, includes the United States government. Again, I want to be clear, but I also want to be fair. We did not live up to our values, but other organizations that we routinely defer to help guide the proper decision-making and the implementation or the expression of those values were not making the decisions that they have now made. And so as soon as we became aware of these things, certainly at the international level, we moved very, very quickly.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time. I'd love to ask more, but give them a round of applause for coming. Thanks so much. Thank you all for coming, too.